I'm good. I'm looking at comments, Mark, and they're saying no audio.
All right, I think they're going to have me now, and let's make sure that they have you. Let's double check that. So we got about a 20-second delay, and we'll just give it a few seconds here and get confirmation. I think we've got it all worked out now, and I'll just say that all over again. So let's see. We got Mark B is here. Joseph is here. Tim is here. Can hear you now, Joseph
Excellent.
Kinsinger. Joseph, great to have you here on YouTube. Thanks for finding me here as well. I know that we've encountered elsewhere on social media as well. So you can hear me and you can hear Dan. Dan, let me just kind of regurgitate what I said when no one can hear me, and that is, in short form, I've done a lot of nature, wildlife, and bald eagle stuff in live streaming and on this YouTube channel, and some breaking news. As the title says on the show, we talk about photography here. We talk about news, talk, and tech. This is going to be a bit more news-oriented. But first, Dan Klein, my guest tonight from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Once again, Dan, how you doing?
I'm good, Mark. It's good talking to you. Two bald guys, bald eagles.
I wondered how long it was going to take you to go there. and Dana Steele, thank you once again for confirming that we have audio. This is something that we've talked about for some time, and let's give some folks here kind of the origin. We met about 20 years ago. You were a police officer in Albuquerque. I was a so I still would have been at Channel 13, the CBS affiliate, KRQE in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so we met professionally. Do you remember that time way back when?
Oh, yeah. We met down on Central Avenue, a couple of old hotels that were down there, and a lot of transients, a lot of drug use.
That's exactly right. That's right. I want to say it was West Central, if I remember. It's funny. I was thinking about that earlier today.
Right around 47th and Central. All those hotels have been torn down now.
Wow.
They're all just empty lots right now.
Wow. Well, we did talk many times since you've retired and since I've left New Mexico about doing something like this, as we've both watched technology, grow by leaps and bounds. In fact, you used to have to push reporters, didn't you, with phone calls and such, saying, you guys should cover this. You guys should cover this. The world has changed. It's gone digital. In fact, now you are out there writing about stories and issues in the news, right?
Yes, I was writing for the Albuquerque Free Press. It's now kind of morphed into an online paper called the ABQ Report, and it's edited and owned by, I think, someone you know, Dennis Domzalski, who's been an Albuquerque reporter, oh my gosh, since I think 1982 he's been here in Albuquerque.
Right. And writing for that, let's just dive right into there. So now that you have a voice, if you will, where people can find you and you don't have to go through a news media pitch, hoping a story gets covered, you get to write about it, and you can tell it, I guess, like you want to tell it. You're more of a columnist as opposed to a journalist going out there pounding the pavement.
Exactly.
And so most recently, and again, the link I want to say for this website that Dan's writing for, Dan's got a unique perspective, I think, in many ways for law enforcement, or in this case, retired law enforcement. More on that in just a moment. But the link to the website where Dan writes, ABQ Report, can also be found below this video in the description. And there's another link for Dan. We'll talk more about that as well just a bit later. But let's talk about what you most recently wrote about, and it ties into two things: gun violence and fear. Tell us about that.
Yeah, what I wrote about, it's a two-part series, and it goes on about the way that Americans, I think Americans especially, are just, we're played. We're played by people on the hard left, we're played by people on the hard right, and the reason we're played is usually through fear. And the Parkland shooting, I thought, was a perfect example of this. The local news media, your old station, had parents here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that were just tearful and afraid to send their children to school, that they would never see them again. And it doesn't match what a reasonable, intelligent person should know, which is there's around 50 million kids that march off to school every day in this country, and they all come right back home and they're all fine. The odds of your child, or even you as an adult, being in a workplace shooting or a school shooting are just astronomical. It's almost like winning the Powerball. I mean, in a very bad way if it happens, but those are the odds. but you don't get that. I think it's because of the way the world is. We're so connected that you have a guy who drives over a whole bunch of people in France in a stolen semi-tractor trailer. It's on the news here immediately, and people in New York City feel that it's happening to them, that it's happened in their community, and it breeds a fear response, which then normally triggers an overreaction and an overreach of either people in government or people with agendas. The far left with a very anti-gun stance, and the far right with a very pro don't touch my gun stance. When you look at it, every year there are probably, I think we can almost certainly say, with the exception of Virginia Tech, which was probably 15 to 20 years ago, you could probably easily say there are less than 50 people shot and killed at any school, even a higher education school, altogether throughout the whole year. But we have 17,000 people murdered, one here, one there, and that just kind of goes by the wayside. We seem to get fixated on these mass events that the likelihood will never happen to you.
Okay, so
and ignoring the other ones.
Okay, a couple things. First of all, let me just kind of interject this real quick, Dan. I know you haven't done these. This is our very first time. If you don't mind looking at the camera, that would be great. So we have a little eye contact.
It looks like you over there.
Yeah, let's stop doing that. Pretend that I'm the lens of that webcam that you have right in front of you.
There
okay,
you
and everybody
right underneath it.
There you go. Oh, there you go. Perfect. So, first of all, I hear you say a couple things. They also feel like members of this. The people watching this and participating in the live chat are going to be asking questions from different perspectives as well. First of all, Joseph says, so true. News is what needs to get out. The news needs to get out. I can take that a couple different ways. But first of all, Dan, what I hear you saying is you're basically saying there's this compression because of all the technology and everything landing immediately right in the palm of our hand, that collectively with events around the world, it feels like we're kind of feeling the residue of every one of these events, and there's like a wearing out that basically adds up to a fear and a hypersensitivity is, I think, what you're saying.
Yeah, and something happens in London, we see it here immediately, and people here begin to think that it's on our doorstep. And it's not, and to that point, we could talk about international terrorism. Outside of 2001. This country, even going into Western Europe for the most part, the number of people harmed or killed in an international type terrorism incident is so minuscule. But you wouldn't know that from the politicians, the talking heads at CNN and Fox. You wouldn't know that. You'd think, and it, just like my article said, you think that the boogeyman is right outside your door. ISIS is hiding behind a tree, Mark, right outside of your house. That's how people get to feeling. And what I'm hoping by doing the writing that I'm doing is we can get people to realize, this is news, but you don't have to be scared that it's right outside your doorstep, and don't overreact to it. Which means, don't. TSA and Homeland Security was a great example of overreaction. We exchanged some of our liberties for the falsehood of security. And I know you've flown, I've flown, and you get groped at the airport now. Well, I wish for the old days. I'd be willing to go back to the mid-1990s just to be able to, go through the metal detector, jump on my plane, and not have somebody taking, give me a good feel before I get on the plane.
Okay. Despite all of that and your reassurance, I suspect that there are still people who are saying, and maybe mistaking in part what you're saying, because you're not saying don't do anything. You're just saying don't overreact. Dana Steele in the comments says, wow, are you aware about the flight attendant and her husband who was a policeman? They picked up their son from school and he killed them. Is that a story you're familiar with? Yeah,
that's the one up in Michigan. We'll have to see what more comes out of that story. That he was a policeman, the father that was killed. He was actually also an Iraqi war veteran. Who knows? And that's one thing I will not do I won't come out and speculate. I hate it when they put people on TV that just start, they're my law, here's the law enforcement expert for CNN, Mr. FBI XYZ or NYPD, and they go, well, we don't know anything about it, but it could be this and it could be that. Turn off your TVs when they start doing that. That's not news. That's trash. That's garbage. Wait for the actual story to come out, and then we can make our determinations from there.
Yeah, it used to be that you would wait for the results from people who have actually been out there in the field working the sources, waiting for the investigation to run its course in part. Hopefully, as a reporter, you want to get someone's ear inside the investigation whose confidence you can earn, and you don't want to jeopardize the integrity of the investigation. But rather than just simply plopping someone down in a seat because they had a career, doing something for 20 odd years and they're a so-called expert, and they actually probably get paid, right, to sit there and pontificate
to
pontificate and speculate, and you can create pictures and run with it in all sorts of directions. A great case in sports right now is the Sean Miller case with the NCAA investigation, a guy who was even his good friends, many of them nationally well-known on-air type people, who really slammed him and expressed their disappointment before hearing from him. And he recently stood up at a news conference finally and said, look, all of this is completely untrue. And he's standing up for himself. And we don't know definitively, did ESPN get its information wrong about an FBI agent secretly recording a proposition to pay a player money to come play for the University of Arizona? Right. So a lot of stuff, momentum can go off in a direction before we really know the facts, and that's what you're getting at right there.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that you see, especially with shootings, is almost immediately someone will come on to cable news and say, well, there's probably a history of mental illness. Oh, no, the only mental illness history I see is actually on cable news, because they'll start talking about mental illness and firearms like the two walk hand in hand, and they absolutely do not. The studies are so clear that diagnosed mentally ill people, they're not out there doing this stuff. They're not out there committing, these heinous acts. But it plays well, for the president or for politicians or for news pundits to get up there and almost immediately start saying, well, there must have been a history of mental illness. What person could go to Las Vegas and go up to a hotel room and open fire on thousands of people, killing 58 of them? You must be mentally ill. Well, maybe not. And maybe the media and the politicians should take a step back before they start making those statements and wait to see, what was this guy's mental history? And if they're willing to say that we need to really hammer down on people who are mentally ill, then does that include the roughly 40 million Americans who suffer from anxiety or depression? And then do we give up our right to privacy?
Well, some tough lines would have to be
all of our medical records for the false hope that by doing so we'll all be safer from these events that are so astronomical and happening. Am I making sense, viewers? I hope I am.
I think that you have viewers who, some will agree, some will not agree, some might think you're close or way off. But I do think with certainty that there are viewers who are trying to figure out Dan Klein. Where is this guy coming down? Is he pro-NRA? Is he anti-NRA? Would this guy be always pro-cop and tote the blue line? Would this guy be would he ever be one to criticize any police action? And that's part of what I want to ask you about as we get into a little bit of discussion about body cameras, police body cameras.
Who am I, Mark? You've known me for 25 years now.
I think you call it straight, even when it's really unpopular with the men and women in blue. And that's who I know you to be. And I think that basically, what we have as a country, it seems is very divided, right? We can elaborate on that, but I think we've all heard people go off about that. But to the point, you are not really taking a political line. I don't think you just see right and wrong. And that's what's so refreshing, even if it's something within your own house, so to speak, whether it was your professional occupation or what have you. I think you just want to be a straight shooter and you want to shine a light on things, even if it's a fellow officer. I know that when you were a sergeant, you probably said some things directly to new police officers that were probably not the common things said to them as they were adapting to their new profession.
Well, yeah, and to that, I'm a retired police officer, police sergeant, police officer. I'm also an NRA member, lifetime NRA member. And I also disagree greatly with the people that run the NRA. I believe that when it comes to firearms, the federal government should step in, and you shouldn't be allowed, if you're under the age of 21, to purchase any gun. And if law enforcement catches you with a firearm, you need to be in the accompaniment of someone over 21. And I hear this argument from people who say, well, what about our brave soldiers? They're in the military. Well, so was my son, and he was in the infantry, and he explains this very well. He says, yeah, when we had our firearms, we always had sergeants, lieutenants, and captains supervising us. And when we were in the United States, we were only allowed to have firearms on base at the range. We weren't allowed to purchase and bring our own firearms onto the base. And so that argument that you hear, that'll be tossed out by, some of the folks I know at the NRA, it's just simply a lie. The guys in the military, they're supervised by adults. And that if you do look at school shootings, the 99% of the offenders in school shootings are under the age of 21. So it's just kind of, in that regard, it just kind of seems right. They shouldn't be allowed to purchase. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't have a gun. But if you're going to be out there having a gun, if you're, living in Nebraska and you want to go hunting, well, you know what? You need to take your older brother or your father or your uncle or your aunt or someone with you. You need to be accompanied by an adult, plain and simple. And I shake my head at the leadership of the NRA, who, just fights anything and everything that comes up. And so yeah, I belong to these groups. I won't give up my membership because it's just like the United States. I may not be real pleased with the direction that it's going right now, but I'm not going to give up my citizenship. You can make better change by staying in the system and working to change it from within. Sometimes it takes a while.
Well, it's one of the things I like about you, Dan. We touched on it earlier. You're refreshing in the sense that you're just not party line, and I really respect that about you. We only have so much time, whatever we make of it. I want to keep the show moving because there are several topics I want to hit on with you. Admittedly, this is going to be kind of a buffet of topics, very controversial topics at times. And we'll see if anything really resonates with our viewers. And if so, perhaps we come back and do a live stream in the future where we just focus on that one topic, especially if there are a lot of questions, perhaps. But I think the next...
Body cameras.
Yeah, exactly. The next segue is body cameras. You have been, as I recall in the past, very pro body cameras for law enforcement. Tell me why.
Well, I am and I'm not. We need to have body cameras. It's just the world that we're living in. And it's not for your old friends in media, who've now gotten very lazy, by the way. And the only thing you see on media is, what's the latest lapel camera released by the police department that shows murder and mayhem. I remember you were the very first person that told me that if it bleeds, it will lead. And so, that part of body cameras, I just hate. And the other part of body cameras I hate is they're thrust upon these police departments without any firm policies guaranteeing the privacy of the citizen. And I think it's really important that gets taken care of first. And, I'm a retired police officer. I'm an NRA member. I'm also a member of the ACLU. I'm very proud to be a member of the ACLU. The ACLU has, I think, some very good policy guidelines for police departments that just don't seem to be picked up on how to thread that needle. You need to document. You're a public servant. You need to document. This is just the century we live in. This is how we document activities of public servants. But we also need to be very cautious when we're crossing that line into people's private lives, not to take away their Fourth or their Eighth Amendment rights. You do have a right to privacy. And I asked officers in Albuquerque who had body cameras thrust upon them by a chief of police years ago who was in cahoots with one of the body camera companies. I asked them specifically, if you came to my house for a burglary call, and I asked you that before you came into my home, I want you to turn your cameras off. I don't want my cameras, or I don't want my home to be on film, and I don't want my family to be on film, because the viewers need to know, when you're on film, anyone can request it, and it's open to the public. It is a public record. And so I asked these officers, well, what if I don't want you to film? They don't know how to respond. Because APD still to this day doesn't have a firm policy with that. And I will guarantee you probably 90% of the police departments in the United States don't. And then the other pickle with this is you have the Department of Justice coming into a lot of these towns, pointing a crooked finger saying, yes, you need body cameras. You guys haven't been doing constitutional policing. We need to get this fixed. Body cameras is the best way to shine the light of day for you guys. But ATF, the U.S. Marshals, the FBI, no, our policy is we will not wear body cameras. And that's just flat out wrong. If the local law enforcement's going to use it, citizens need to demand that federal law enforcement wears it also, and that it is a public record. Right now it's just a mess right now. It really is.
There are a lot of issues attached to it. You've addressed several of them. Time would be another one in terms of review and so forth. But let me just get to this, and then I want to get to a question asked by Joseph in the chat. And it is this. Early on, I guess, when things were really, when a very bright light was being shown upon the body cam issue in Albuquerque, as I recall, it was up there on Tramway Boulevard on the east side, up in the foothills there, the mountains. And there was a high-profile case that was captured, a shooting of a homeless man.
James Boyd.
Yes, and ultimately, that story even found, if I am correct, correct me if I'm wrong, it found its way to Rolling Stone, correct? And you were why were you interviewed by Rolling Stone, and what did you have to say about that?
I was interviewed because they called me, and I was one of the few people that would, from the law enforcement side, that would give an interview. I was already retired at the time. I knew a number of the officers that were involved. And I was just willing to talk to them and say, what I thought happened, what went right, what went wrong. And with the James Boyd shooting, the biggest thing that went wrong was the police command staff never showed up that day. And then they let these two officers just hang out in the wind, and that's not how our policies were set up. That's not how our procedures were set up. But that's exactly what happened that day. They were out there, I think, for 8 to 10 hours before Boyd was shot, and there was just no supervision out there.
Should he have been? Was it? I think there seems to be an agreement that for most people that would not have been a justified shooting. That situation was not handled correctly.
Well, and here's the question then. Okay, what is justified? Justified means, does it meet state statute?
Deadly force, right? The threat of deadly force is what I was always taught.
The threat of deadly force. And so they actually indicted the two officers. They went to a criminal trial, and they came back with a hung jury. The jury hung in favor of acquittal for the police officers. I believe there were 3 jurors that wanted to go with guilty, and the other 9 were voting for acquittal. And then at that point, the district attorney said they're done. They're just not going to retry it.
What role did? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
How might that whole incident have been different in its aftermath had there been no existence of the footage that we saw from those police body cameras?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you a great example. The U.S. Marshals in, I think it was 2015, they had a shooting here in front of a methadone clinic where they went to arrest a guy who was wanted in a pickup. He was driving a pickup truck, had dropped his friend off at the methadone clinic. If y'all don't know what methadone is, it's what heroin addicts use when they're not using heroin. And it's given out usually by the government. And so this guy's sitting there, a bunch of marshals come running up to his vehicle. He doesn't really put it in drive. He doesn't go speeding off, but he gets shot in the head. And the whole story is that, the marshals were in fear that he was going to run over one of them. There was no lapel video of that. You basically had to take everybody's word for it. And so to the same point, if there wasn't lapel video of James Boyd, you wouldn't even know who James Boyd is. It had just been another shooting. A homeless guy attacked an officer with a knife, and he got shot.
let's turn the tables. Joseph Kinsinger in chat once again. Thank you for your contribution, Joseph. He says, you try to video the police and they don't like it here in Indiana. And I'll tell you what, I've seen plenty of instances of that.
Yeah, and and to me, that's a complete failure of supervision from the chief or the sheriff on down. They own that when their officers are so fixated on someone filming them instead of just doing the job that you're there to do. I would be on calls with Mark. Mark would be out there filming, and to have an officer come running up, well, the media's here. Completely ignoring what that officer was actually supposed to be doing, maybe crime scene security, maybe, who knows what. But the media showed up, and it's just, oh my God, the media is here. And I would have to tell them, well, just go back and do your job. Who cares? They have a job to do. We have a job to do. If they cross the yellow tape, tell them once to get out. If they don't, we'll take it from there. But most of these guys are pretty good. And if it's citizens, same difference. If they cross the yellow tape, tell them to get out. If they don't, but other than that, let them film. Who cares?
Yeah.
You have a job that you need to stay fixated on and not get diverted into these ridiculous games. And I think North Carolina, and I might correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought they actually enacted a law where it's illegal to film.
Well, I'll tell you what, as a former journalist, I can tell you that anybody who spent time as a reporter or a news photographer or out working in the field in a journalistic capacity has been to that situation where they show up, members of the public are already there, but you show up and you've got that camera, you've got that tripod. Boy, the eyeballs can be on you in many cases from law enforcement. You attract that person like a magnet, and suddenly they're telling you to step back, and you say, but you're letting these folks all stand here. And then they go, that's when they grab the yellow tape, and they pull that yellow tape back and make everybody collectively back up. But they had no problem whatsoever when, John and Jane Public were simply standing there. And there's a whole new component in our modern time now, and that you can argue that everybody's a citizen journalist as long as they've got a camera or a smartphone in their hand. They're oftentimes on the front lines getting, aren't they, the story on video or photograph before the mainstream media ever shows up. So I'm sure, I feel by and large, and I think where I come down on this, that most law enforcement officers are very good people, and I've long said that firefighters and law enforcement officers are underpaid when you consider what they do, truly. But like any other profession, these are professions that consist of human beings. Human beings can have a bad day, and you know what? Some of them probably shouldn't be in that chosen profession, and some of them can just have it out for members of the media or the person who seems lone and vulnerable who can be stepped upon. And I think that when I was working as a journalist for a long time, and I read the criminal complaints as my daily beat, at Metro Court in Albuquerque, for example, and going over to District Court, you read the narratives provided overnight regarding the overnight arrests. And by and large, you took that, perhaps not as with the grain of salt that we probably should have. In my post-journalistic life, I guess I've become increasingly sensitive to those who are vulnerable, and the likelihood that for some people who simply don't have the resources to contest a difficult situation like charges and afford a lawyer and so forth, I think you have to know that there are people who are simply copping a plea, not because they feel that they're guilty in some cases. They just want to put it behind them, and they're overwhelmed, perhaps.
Yeah, and they can't afford to keep fighting, the government.
Right.
Basically is what it comes down to. We had a case here where, this thing drug out for 3 or 4 years. I think it was in Valencia County, which is a county just south of Albuquerque. And at the end of the day, they go to a separate investigation is done by the defendant. He actually had a little bit of money, could do a separate investigation, and they come out and they basically said, "Hey, everything the police are alleging here is just false. It did not happen that way. We can prove it." And at the last minute, the state says, "No, we're still going to go to trial." They walk in the doors to go to trial, and then they run over to the defense table and say, "Look, if you plead to this really lesser misdemeanor, we'll just let it go." Because they're looking for wins and losses. They're not looking for justice. They're looking for the win and loss column. And thankfully, in this case, the attorney's name was John D'Amato, who's a very good friend of mine. John D'Amato said, "Stick it up your ass. We're going to take this to trial because we know we can beat you." And immediately, the state's attorney or the district attorney went to the judge and said, "We're dropping all charges." after keeping this defendant on a string for 3 to 4 years. And that's just, it's a real problem with our justice system. Our justice system is not interested in justice. District attorneys are interested in win and losses. They want to have more in the win column, and a plea bargain gives them a win. They really, and I hope there's a DA out there who will contest me on this, because I know that this is exactly what they're looking at. They don't want to take hard cases to trial if we can get a simpler plea. Let's just get a plea, get a win in the win column, and move on, because I'm coming up for re-election.
All right. I agree with much of what you said there, but I'm going to call you out on not interested in justice. I've known some district attorneys, some assistant district attorneys, and I truly believe that in many cases they are interested in justice.
Yeah, I probably overspoke that one a little bit.
I think you overspoke that one, Dan, but I'll tell you what, I agree with you that there is certainly a score being kept of wins and losses, and the ratio of pleas to actual have to go to trial. And the notion of having to go to trial, if it can be avoided by the judge, by the state, is a big cost saver and time saver. And there are oftentimes, there are those out there who would say, yeah, but consider the caseloads, consider what they have, there's that whole component of it. But yes, I think to really dig down into the niche that you're trying to shine a light on, are there cases when they have people who that very well could be innocent, but it doesn't fit the agenda where they need to get that conviction or that plea? To improve their scoreboard, if you will? Certainly, I do believe that takes place.
And here's the thing: I have seen very, very rarely where a district attorney will get a case from a police officer and say, "Oh, that was a bad arrest. There's nothing here, and we just are going to drop charges." I've seen that very rarely happen. What I've seen happen is district attorneys say, "This isn't a very good arrest. Maybe we can get this guy to plead to something lesser. Let's get him to plead to something lesser." Once
Right.
the criminal justice system in America, and I'm kind of down on it, and it's not all bad, but we do have tremendous problems with our criminal justice system. Once they get someone into the system, it's like being in a spider's web that you cannot get out of. You go to Ferguson, Missouri, or especially places like Ferguson, where the police departments, their budget comes from the fines that people pay. And you will find that the police, instead of being, keepers of the peace, they are just a backdoor tax man. And that is the marching orders they have from their mayor, their city councils, their police chiefs. Hey, with the more revenue we're bringing in, the newer car you can drive, that type of thing. The number one ticket issued in Ferguson was jaywalking. Wrap your head around that for a minute, and then maybe people, on the West Coast or in other parts of the United States can understand maybe how those folks in Ferguson felt that, they didn't have the type of hero worship love that a lot of Americans have for law enforcement.
Gotcha.
Because I believe law enforcement was not doing them a service. Okay, jaywalking it is against the law, and there are times you need to take action on it.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the number one ticket written. And I read reports of people who, once they got written the ticket, because they were poor folks, Ferguson is a very poor town, they would have to make a decision. Well, do I feed my kids or pay my rent this month, or do I pay the ticket, or do I pay the jail costs?
Yeah.
And then of course, they're going to feed their kids. They don't pay the jail costs. Now the spider web. Now they have a warrant out for their arrest. Now they have more issues with the criminal justice system. And that system just sucks the blood right out of them. And that's not what our criminal justice system is supposed to be doing.
Okay. Dan, I want to move on to unclaimed property, but before we do, I want to read a couple of quick comments from the chat. Dana Steele. Dana, thank you for letting me know it is Dana and not Dana in our recent conversation online. Dana says it's illegal to film a lot of things here in North Carolina. Tim says there are a lot of, quote, AG gag, end quote, bills throughout the U.S. that make filming farms illegal.
Yeah, agricultural bills, yeah.
Filming farms. Why would filming farms, even if you're, for example, on a public road, you couldn't shoot the farm?
I've heard about this, and the whole thing is, if you're on a public road, you're on a public road. But I've heard what he is talking about. I don't know if they're worried about copyrights. I mean, how their corn is growing. I don't know, but I've heard exactly what he's saying. So I
It's
know it's
crazy. I think of my brother who was flying his drone today up on Camino Island, Washington, over farm country, and he's live streaming on Facebook. Is he breaking the law if he was doing that in some states? I don't think that's a lawbreaker here, but that's as long as you're not too close to an airport and so forth and so on. Very interesting. Dana says maybe it's related to animal cruelty or sensitivities toward that. I don't know. But anyhow, let's kind of shift topic kind of a bit dramatically now, because that's what you did after all, from when you went from your former professional life to what you're currently doing, or did the heavy lifting on. And I think you kind of set your kids up with this, your grown kids. And that is unclaimed property. You have a company called USA Locators LLC. In fact, there's a link to Dan's website, USA Locators LLC, in the description beneath this video. And it really just focuses on that, unclaimed property. Now, Dan, I have to tell you, back in the late 90s when I was at KRQE, I got assigned a sweeps topic. Sometimes we generated our own ideas for the ratings period, the big book piece or series.
Right.
Sometimes we were told what to do. Well, sometimes the consultants who talk to media across the country, they get paid to tell you what to do. And the consultants came and said, hey, you got to do this unclaimed property story. So it was given to me. And I went to Santa Fe and I did this story on unclaimed property. I think the woman's name, who was the PIO for that appropriate state agency, you have to remind me of the agency. It wasn't Revenue, was it?
Yeah.
It is Revenue. Tax and Revenue. Victoria Bransford was her name. Does that name ring a bell?
No, not
okay.
at all.
She did a great job of telling me about it. The focus for television was to walk into a vault and just see all of this property, whether it be jewelry, guns, coins, all sorts of things inside a vault that belonged to people. Much of this had come from banks, as I recall, but had just been left in deposit boxes for maybe more than 7 years or what have you. And it ends up at the state. Now, that was the good eye candy, but a lot of what is unclaimed property is, in fact, cold, hard cash. So I've kind of set it up in a long-winded way, but perhaps you would like to further flesh out what exactly is unclaimed property and now your connection to it.
Yeah, all 50 states, and actually it's worldwide in a lot of different countries, but all 50 states basically have the same statutes that govern unclaimed properties. And they say, like a bank, if you have a safety deposit box at a bank, if there's no action or activity on that box within a 5-year time period, just for example, the bank is required by law to drill that safety deposit box out, send all the contents to the state. If there's a life insurance policy from Prudential, and the last known address of that policy was, let's say, in 123 First Street, Los Angeles. Well, Prudential needs to send that $50,000 life insurance policy if there's been no action on it within 5 years. 5 years is pretty much the standard through most of the states, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. They've got to send it to the state of California for safekeeping. Now, the states are supposed to it's supposed to be safekeeping. It's still the property of the person who owned it, or if they're deceased, their heirs. But I know of no states that actively try to find the owners of lost property. And it really comes down to, why would they? 3 examples: New York, Texas, and California. Each state individually sits on $10 billion of your money.
Interest.
Yeah, I mean, and they'll say, well, no, we technically can't make money off of it. Yeah, okay, right.
Aren't they making interest on it?
I'm sure they're investing it. They can't use it specifically to fund things, but I do believe that, yeah, they're making interest on it, and I do believe that at times our governments are so convoluted with our budgets. You would have to honestly prove to me that, take me to Bank of America. By God, don't take me to Wells Fargo. Those guys are a bunch of crooks. But take me to Bank of America.
Tell us how you really feel.
And show me, the account. Show me the account from Texas that says, yeah, $10 billion here, and it's just being held for those good people of Texas that have lost this property. They can't do it. A little bit's here and a little bit's there, and it's here and there. And one thing that the viewers need to know about is California is a good example of this. 10 years ago, during the big financial collapse, the governor and the legislature of California, they needed money, and they changed the laws. And instead of waiting 5 years, for example, to drill out safety deposit boxes, they changed the laws that it would be 1 year. They wanted everything after 1 year. And so, people were losing a lot of property. They would go and their safety deposit box is gone.
So
Family heirlooms are gone.
The state just wanted a real shallow dive to go get assets.
That's it. And they would auction it almost immediately for pennies on the dollar. The states were just trying to get money back then. There's a huge lawsuit against the state of California that they lost. And they had to pay back a lot of money to people. But, if you just lost grandma's heirlooms, no amount of money is probably going to make that part up. And so, this is a part of government that it's a good thing, because someone does need to be the lost and found. But, the citizens always need to be watchful and make sure that it's very transparent, that, the property is not grabbed too quickly. Now, the flip side of that, and we ran into this with one of the insurance companies many times over. The insurance companies keep my company in business because they do such a horrible job of due diligence. We ran into a life insurance policy that actually had been held by the insurance company as lost before they turned it over to the state. They had held it for 20, 30 years.
Wow.
They're supposed to turn it over right away. They'd held it for 20, 30 years. And the reason we know this is the family lived in Monte Vista, Colorado for 6 months in 1953. And that was the address that they had. And Colorado got this money, but Colorado didn't get this money until 2013. And so,
wow.
And then another kicker, and we're dealing with this in the state of Colorado right now. The state requires that, when a claim is filed by a citizen, the state, normally, all states work on the same basis. Normally, they have to respond and finalize this claim within 90 days. The state of Colorado right now, they are ignoring their own statute. What's the citizen to do? The statute says, hey, if they don't get it done in 90 days, you can take them to court. Well, who wants to go to court? Now we're back in that spider web that doesn't really help anybody. We've had claims in the state of Colorado that have been in process for over 12 months with no end in sight.
Well,
we talk to the treasurer up there, and they just throw their hands up in the air and they say, well, we're really overworked. That's not good government, and that's not a good excuse. And if you're in Colorado,
no one's holding the fire.
Call Walker, call Walker Stapleton, the treasurer, and start holding his feet to the fire on this.
Okay, Dan, let me just kind of interject real quick, because I really want to paint a picture in terms of what your role in terms of this issue is. But I first want to say, in the interest of true transparency, that there was a time where I helped you at USA Locators. I had left a television job, and before moving on to my current job, there was a window of time, and I assisted you, although I was not nearly as good at it as you are with your diligence.
You were good.
No. But anyhow, so basically, as I recall, what we would do is we'd go through lists of property. The last note, the state has records of names and people who had this property associated with them. These people are either deceased or they're still alive. But whoever is the person who should inherit it, or the person who's still living, they're apparently not aware that they have this property. So what you do is you like to get the list of names, try and find those people or their next of kin, and say, hey, look what we found. And then they're oftentimes delighted, and you take a small cut, in a sense, for basically reuniting the property with the rightful owner.
Yeah,
right?
And we go a lot farther. Half of what we do is finding the people, but the other half is, it's like presenting a court case, getting all the paperwork together, getting everything done right, getting our proof lined up before we hand it to the state. And then we'll advocate for our clients once it's in there. And we've had some that have been very, very convoluted. We had an incident just a few months ago here where everything was connected to a deceased person's social security number. But someone with the state of New Mexico and the OMI's office was lazy on the day that guy died, and they didn't write his social security number on his death certificate. Oh. And boy, it was, I thought I had seen everything, and was that an eye-opening experience. We were able to finally prove everything, but that's the other half of why you pay me. It's not just that, or pay my company, is we not just find you, but there can be obstacles, and we pretty much know how to work around and get all the obstacles handled. The Social Security number was one of the hardest ones we've ever worked on. But we were able to do a lot of public records requests to a lot of different agencies that handled this guy's remains, and we were able to get this finished up.
Maybe one of your better stories that you could share with us in terms of the gratitude that an individual and surprise that that individual felt?
Well, we had a homeless guy. This was probably 6, 7 years ago. A very common name, and what had happened was his father and stepmother had both died out here in a little town in New Mexico called Socorro. Mark knows Socorro. I don't know why anyone from New York City would move to Socorro unless you were running from the law, but that's where his dad and stepmother showed up.
The mining there, the mining college.
Yeah, New Mexico Tech. Great school, by the way.
Yeah.
And so what had happened was when his father died in 1989 or so, the son came out from New York City, tried to probate his estate. The father had left him, around $500,000. But probate law in New Mexico is different than probate law in New York City or New York State. In New York State, the will would have handled it, and he left everything to his son. But once he came to New Mexico, it's community property state. The will did not matter. The wife became the owner of all of his estate, and that's what the probate judge said. So his stepmother became the owner of the estate. He went back to New York City, became homeless, just kind of wandering around. The stepmother became crazy. She was diving into dumpsters. We pulled all sorts of police reports on this poor lady. She really had a mental illness after her husband died. She then passed away 10 years later. 10 years after that, we pick up this case and we start looking for this guy. Very common name. So we end up just writing around 25 to 30 letters to different places back in the New York and New Jersey area. And one of them hits a place that's like a YMCA, basically. And they knew the guy. He had been staying there. So he shows up one day and they give him the letter. He calls us. Suffice to say, because the stepmother was now deceased, he now was the only heir. We redid everything for him down in Socorro County, and he recovered $250,000. I don't know what he did with it. He gave us a big thank you, and we never heard from him again. So I don't know what happened to him.
The reporter hat that's still nearby, it feels like at all times, just wants to run with that story and tell that story and see get his reaction to that. And now, since some time has passed, how has his life changed and so forth? Because that is a tremendous story, Dan.
I don't know. I knew this guy for like 6 months. Well, we did a lot of conversations on the phone. I didn't hold out a lot of hope that his lifestyle was going to change, but maybe it did. Maybe it did.
But it's not uncommon for you to have people express their gratitude.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If you go to the website, you'll just see a fraction of the letters and comments that are sent in. We had another gentleman out of Kansas City, Missouri, whose young daughter had passed away in a car wreck, and they had one of these Gerber life insurance policies. And he never knew anything about it. Him and the mom were not husband and wife, and they were having issues, and she had taken the kid and was going to come back to Albuquerque against court orders from Missouri, and while she's driving back, she gets in a car wreck in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and dies. The mother dies, the child dies, and another person in the vehicle died. And so we reached out to the dad, and this is 15 years later. And it took a lot of work on that one. The state required a lot of different proof for that, and so we ended up going back into Kansas City, Missouri, family court, pulling out all sorts of paperwork showing that he was the father. And once we were able to prove those things, the state released a $15,000 life insurance policy to him, which then went to his other sibling, the half sister of the child who died, because they're getting ready to start to college. And that was a nice story. It was a nice story. The guy brought up a lot of painful memories for him, but it was something that he could hand off to his adult or coming to adult daughter now and help her with school.
The flip side of all these wonderful stories are the ones where As I recall, sometimes you run into people who either don't want to pay a cut, or they simply say they know about it, but they'll get to it someday, which kind of
Yeah,
surprises me.
yeah, and it really does. That doesn't happen very often. I've got to say, the 99.9% of our clients, once we, are able to talk to them, explain to them how we do business, what we've found, because that's how we do it. We tell everybody straight up front before we send them anything to sign. And 99% of them are happy with what we're doing, and they'll send back our contract, and we get to rolling on it. Our fees are very reasonable. And we're an A+ accredited company with the Better Business Bureau. And so, people, most Americans are good folks like that. Now, what I do run into is the people who just say, yeah, I knew about that. Well, I kind of doubt that they did, but then they never even act on it, even without our help.
Mm-hmm.
They never act on it. My company purchased these lists from several different states year after year. So we know some of these names already and some of the claims because we've already worked on them. And I'll sit there and say, wow, we wrote letters on this claim back in 2011, talked to the people. They didn't do anything, or maybe we even sent them, the documentation to get things rolling. Nothing. 2 years later, we'll send them a new letter, say, hey, would you like to restart this? They'll call, have nice conversations. We'll send them out everything, and then nothing happens again. It's odd. Thankfully, there's not that many people that are that way. The majority of people, when we call them up, they're wanting their money back immediately. They let's get these claim forms in and get this rolling. But yeah, we do run across a few that you just shake your head. You don't know what's going on in their lives, that they they just don't get anything done.
Part of a pattern in their life, I would
assume.
Yeah. Joseph Kinsinger once again commenting. He says, I have received $28,000 from my grandfather's insurance that I knew nothing about.
Yeah, and that it happens very frequent. I mean, that happens really frequently. Especially in New Mexico. We work the western states a lot of oil royalties, and we end up contacting grandchildren who never. I'll give you a case out of Carlsbad. The guy's name was Andy Griffith, believe it or not. Andy Griffith passed away in 1993. He left almost $100,000 to great nieces and nephews who he never knew. They never knew him.
Wow.
But he had all their names. There was 13 of them. And so we get to looking into this, and we found 12 of the 13. And we were able to return their shares. The 13th is somewhere up in Alaska, and we wrote letters to police departments, and some people knew him. I don't know if this guy was a little on the shady side and just didn't want to be contacted, especially by someone whose opening letter says, hey, I'm a retired cop, but this is the business I have now. But yeah, we were able to, and that took almost 2 years to track down all the other heirs. They were all over the United States, and all of them said the same thing. I had an uncle named Andy Griffith. We said, yeah, you did. Or not an uncle, a great uncle. But, and then we send them the will and say, but you're named. You were an infant when he did this will. He knew who you were. And I think that's kind of special.
As I listen to you tell it, I keep telling myself, you have encounters like this one, which I don't know if it's too strong to say restores, but perhaps reaffirms your faith in the fact that there are good people out there.
And Mark knows my wife, and Mark knew me when I was a cop. And both my wife and Mark will tell most everyone, I believe, that I am a different individual today than I was when I was Sergeant Klein on the Albuquerque Police Department. I retired back in 2003. I went to work for the police union for about 4 years. And
you helped people retire.
Yeah, and did other things, and I knew the police union was a dysfunctional bunch, but you really don't know how bad it is until you work for them. And so whenever people say, "Oh, unions are out to just kill the country," believe me, if they're anything like the Albuquerque Police Officers Association, I don't think they could pick their nose and not make a mess out of it. They're just not. They're not trying to do anything. They're just trying to make it day by day. But then when I started this job up, Tina has told me repeatedly, and you told me repeatedly, yeah, you're kind of a different guy. You're a little more trusting, a little bit more laid back. And I think being in business and helping people, and that's the one thing I had to overcome, which would gripe me, was and in 12 years of business, I can count on one hand the number of times we got stiffed. And it still gripes me when I think about it, but I don't dwell on it, and it doesn't make me angry. It just kind of gripes me a little bit, and then I move on. And I focus on all the happy people. And it's like I tell people now, if you get a letter, if the viewers, hey, if you get a letter from USA Locators or Finders Services, you need to call us. It's good news. And I'll tell you, the 20 years I spent with APD, if you heard from me during that time, I was either going to tell you there was a warrant for your arrest and you're going to jail, or a family member was dead or in the hospital. It was never good news when you're a police officer. But now, the last 12 years, it's always good news. If you hear from me, I've got good news to tell you.
I like the way you tell that, but I'll tell you what, I remember I'll give you this East Central Avenue. I saw a woman who seemed to be under the influence of something, and she was going across the road aimlessly. Central Avenue, 4 or 5 lanes of traffic, lots of traffic. And I called APD. She was nearly hit by a car, finally got her off to the side. And I waited and waited and waited. And if it took forever for APD to respond, it felt like that anyway. It was more than 20 minutes, as I recall. And I would have been really happy to see you or anybody else in uniform to show up and help, get a handle on that situation, because I was fearful this woman was going to get killed. So I know the spirit of what you're saying, and I totally agree. Tim says, let's see, Dan, your job sounds fascinating. Dana Steele says, please find my old ancestors. I know they loved me too, LOL.
Hey, you never know. I mean, honestly, people always, whenever we find people and we return money, especially from ancestors, almost always they'll either say one of two things. They'll either say, find us more lost money, Dan. And about half the time they'll name, something will pop up in another, 4 or 5 years that we help them with. Or they'll say, oh yeah, there's nothing else out there. This was a fluke. There's nothing else out there. And I just tell people, you really just can't say that. You just don't know. And it may not be that it was an ancestor that left you money. It just may be that you're the right inheritor, that, by law, everybody's dead and you're the last man standing. So, it falls to you what, great grandpa, the life insurance policy, the great grandpa had years ago. You just never know. And again, I got to tell people, California, New York, Texas, just those 3 states, $30 billion in lost property. And sometimes the only reason it's lost is because the Postal Service made a mistake when they went to deliver it and they sent it back return to sender. Or someone at the company typed in a name wrong on data entry. And so it was rejected, at the Postal Service. Very simple things like that. And
how much effort in terms of due diligence do you feel occurs at the state level in terms of trying to connect the people with the unclaimed property?
No state wants to find. I don't want to say wants to. No state tries to find. They know that the state statute basically says create a clearinghouse. So they may create a little website where they'll put a fraction of the list on there that might be searchable. But normally it's searchable by name. And if there was a data entry error, you're not going to know it. We've had several clients that have said, well, I've gone to missingmoney.com and I've typed my name in and this never came up. And I'd have to say, well, let me send you the list because this is why. They typed your name with a Z instead of an S. And that's it.
We saw that. I remember instances like that when I was assisting you. Dan,
that's why we purchased the list.
We've been talking for 20 odd years, and we've had some conversations like this one. They tend to stretch, don't they? And you're always hoping perhaps that there'll be more media attention on a given issue of the day, if you will. How ironic that we start this live stream off with complete silence on my end. But once we go ahead.
I hope in the future, there's just some things happening within the nation right now and within local locales that people need to really get interested in. The guns issue, you know. I had a guy on Facebook who one person was telling me, you're just a gun nut, you love guns, blah blah blah, and the other guy was saying, one I get is a gun nut, and the other one is you want to take all the guns. Why can't a 20-year-old have a gun? You want to just take them. And my contention is this nation wants to see some type of a little stricter gun control laws, but it's baby steps. We're never going to get anywhere if one side or the other tries to throw the Hail Mary pass and, outlaw all guns or allow all guns. We're never going to get that, but it takes the person at their community level to really get engaged and get involved in this conversation. I thoroughly enjoy watching the legislature in Florida just really flip the high school kids off that were at Parkland, that went through that shooting, and on one, it was just, I didn't enjoy it. It was just infuriating, but you knew it was going to happen. But at the same time, I looked at those kids from Parkland and I was like, well, didn't you take a class in government? You shouldn't be up there crying at the state legislature, surprised that they're voting not to hear this gun debate. Because if you had a class in government, this is kind of how things work in the first steps. Nothing happens overnight. It's a longer process, but you got to be involved in it, and you got to just stay at it. And I hope that those high school kids at Parkland continue staying at it. Just keep chipping away, chipping away, chipping away. They'll see their little victories, which will make things better for the nation. And that doesn't involve taking guns away from everybody. It doesn't involve doing different, taking away your personal privacy rights with your medical records and stuff, etc. I think that this nation will find the right course. I think, as Winston Churchill said, Americans will always do the right thing after they have exhausted every other option. And that's kind of where we're at. But I worry that there's a large group of this country that is just so disenfranchised and so sick and tired of it that they just disconnect. And we got to avoid that, because you live in this country, the government, you're part of it. Stay involved and make your voices heard. Whether you like it to go one way or the other way, make your voices heard. Don't turn off, I guess is what I'm saying.
I'll tell you what, first of all, I give those kids in Parkland tremendous credit. Anything they did, and all of it was aimed at trying to move something forward and in a good direction in their estimation. But to do anything, and under the shadow of what they endured and what they lived through in a very recent window of time, that's going to, color everything in a very profound way. So I commend them. Secondly, I think that, I can't blame them, their youth, for being very hopeful and optimistic and fired up and angry. And I think that rather than, I'm not one of those who wants to throw any sort of negative stone at the direction of those kids at all. I do feel that there are tomorrow's leaders emerging from that generation in a very different way than more recent generations. I've been very impressed with the way some of them have presented. I am not one of those who's, because I see an IFB earpiece in a person's ear as they're being interviewed, who's going to want to zoom in and say, look at that device, they're being coached. I know, having worked in news, that that's what you do when you interview someone live, so that you can communicate with them, so they can hear, and they can hear the producer, right, for the cues and standbys, and good job, thank you for joining us. So I just
I want people to know I'm not disparaging them. I just, a lot of these kids that we see are 16, 17, 18 years old, and when the legislature in Florida came back and just basically flipped them the bird and said, we're not going to talk about guns here, a number of them just seemed so distraught and so surprised.
But think about what they been through. Think about their youth, and think about, they're probably seeing a very simplified version of right and wrong, and they experienced something that is obviously wrong. And so for them, they figured that everybody should want, every adult and young person should want to get together to try and make it right. And that's the oversimplified, but that's the point of view.
I get you there, but I guess I look at 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, and I don't look at them as being youths. I look at them as being adults. They're young adults, and a lot of them are a lot smarter than I will ever be. And if they had the right teachings in their civics and government class, they wouldn't be surprised. And I think that that's where it comes down to. This group can make a great difference, but they've got to know how government works. They just cannot get up on on cable TV and scream and cry,
And
because you know what I'm
I'm not
saying?
disagreeing with you.
They've got to know how to work this the right way. And right now, when I saw them come out of the Florida legislature, I saw this despair. And I worry about that, because then in some regards, despair is going to lead to inaction. Well, I just give up on the system and I'm just not going to try. Now, a lot of these kids aren't saying that right now, but 2 or 3 more defeats down the road, they might. And my hope is that they will take from their government classes how this government works and keep chipping away at it. It's just like an unclaimed property claim that gets rejected the first time. You just keep chipping away at it to prove your case. If they stick with it, this group, I think, can get it done. Although I will tell you one thing that worries me, and that is if we weren't able to get sensible gun laws after Newtown, this is in the news right now, but I really question the old guys that are in D.C. and in these state legislatures who take so much money from the NRA. If they weren't willing to change after Newtown, I don't know, other than voting them out of office, how they would ever change after Parkland. I mean, both are tremendous tragedies. I'm sure people remember Newtown was the first and kindergartners that were murdered. If this nation couldn't get it together after that, I worry. I'm dubious, and I hope they keep pushing. If by this time next year we're still talking about the kids from Parkland and how it's they impacted the 2018 midterms and how things are marching, then I'm going to feel really good about where things are going. It didn't happen after Newtown, and that is one that just befuddles me, because I felt that every single legislator, Democrat, Republican, who didn't get it done after Newtown, who didn't at least come to the table with and have straight up and down votes to make some changes, they should have all been voted out of office. They're all still there, and that worries me. That really does worry me.
I think the difference here is there does seem to be something different about Parkland. It seems to be, obviously these are older kids in this particular situation. And I would not be surprised if 5-10 years down the road, we have a leader that has emerged into additional national prominence and perhaps a political position. And we hear from that person, amongst the things that they say in their recollection of 2018 and this terrible event, that something like, we were young. We were thrust into it. We had no idea what government was really like, to echo your point. I expect that comment. It would not surprise me if we hear something like that from one of these individuals just a few years down the road. So I'd like to think that there are some seeds of hope here with these young people that come out of this tragedy. And I don't think I'm just throwing pie in the sky happy talk at you for the sake of pacification. I really believe that. I've been so impressed and I've been genuinely moved by some of these young people.
I got to tell you, I think the only reason it's really still on the front burner right now is one, because of some of these folks, some of these kids, I don't want to call them kids, some of these adults from Parkland, but also because of the craziness that comes out of the White House. 1 minute, it's taking, not letting a 20-year-old have a gun, that's a good idea. Then the craziness that comes out of the NRA right afterwards. That is right now, to me, the only reason this is still on the front burner of national news, is because the people in the government, the adults in the government, are having crazy talk. And I think this is one reason why Newtown faded, because the people in the government with Newtown, you had a president that came out and said, Congress, you need to do something. I'm not a dictator. I can't act on my own. And then the Congress just basically, no one said any crazy talk, and it just faded away. And right now we have government officials and the folks from the NRA side who just get up and are just saying, crazy things, and that will lead the 5 o'clock news. Let's hear what crazy thing President Trump said today about Parkland. One minute he says, yeah, I'm on board. Next minute he says, no, the NRA's they're a bunch of great guys, but they own you. They own all of you people. And then you have these different legislators who come up and are saying some crazy things. I think we need to keep the crazy talk going with these people, because that's keeping it out there. The
On the
minute
front
that
burner.
talk, the minute that crazy talk fades, then CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, they stop running those stories, because there's something more that'll get viewers in. We need these idiots talking stupidly, so that these kids from Parkland can speak with intelligence, and then maybe in a year or so, put the square peg in the square hole.
In news, they talk about the water cooler test. If it's the thing that people will talk about tomorrow morning at work around the water cooler, then let's keep it alive. If it's got that kind of carbonation or something to it, if it's got that that effect, that impact where people are just abuzz about it and likely to talk about it, if it's a talk about, right, they'll continue to push to keep it in the rundown for the evening news and so on.
And why are we talking about Michigan? I mean, honestly, you don't think there have been probably 500 other murders in America in the last 3 days? But we're talking about Michigan, in Seattle and Albuquerque, because it occurred on a college campus. And that's a big thing for the news media. And that's one thing I really hope that the media starts wrapping their head around, is it's not just on, we lose 17,000 citizens a year to violent deaths. The majority of them are murders, or all of them are murders. Majority of them are committed by guns. We lose another 35,000 Americans every year to suicide by guns. That's not newsworthy. It needs to be newsworthy. That's where we take the Parkland, and that's where I hope the Parkland kids go. That they take their tragedy and they start expanding upon it and saying, hey, you know what? Look at this guy who was shot down on a street in South Dade County. Look at this kid, this 5-year-old who accidentally picked up his gun and killed his 3-year-old sister. If the kids from Parkland pick this up and start running with those stories and directing the national media to start focusing on the whole event, I think we can get some really reasonable, common sense gun laws that this nation, that the majority of the nation wants.
Dan, you started off early on by saying, let's keep it in context. When you talked about your article that you wrote at abqreport.com, you talked about fear. But you know what? In the interest of context, when I was growing up into my young adult life, into my 30s, I think, when we talked about a shooting on campus, we talked about one incident. It was Kent State. What was that, 1972 or something like that?
Yes, I think 71. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was it. Kent State. I mean, it had that dark aura associated with it, and that, that shadow event, and a low point for the U.S. And then Columbine happened, and after a couple decades, more than a couple, 25 years or so, and now the frequency of these events. So when you say, as you did,
let me ask you,
go ahead.
How many this year? How many actual school shootings have occurred? And my definition of an actual school shooting is someone being shot and killed during school hours, a student or a member of faculty on a school campus.
I don't know the number, but I would define it a little bit differently. I would say a shot fired on a school campus doesn't necessarily mean that someone had to be hit or killed. If there were shots fired, from me, that's a school shooting. It's going to broaden the number a bit, and but I don't know the number. Maybe you could shed some light on it for me.
Right. Everytown, which is the group that came out of Newtown, and they're really upfront with their definition of this, and I like that about them. After Parkland, the national news media said, well, we've had 18 school shootings this year. Then the national news media had to eat a lot of crow because whoever was running the reports didn't read the definition that Everytown was using. And Everytown uses your definition. If a gun goes off on a school campus, it's a school shooting. So of those 18, there were, I think, 3 of them that were accidental discharges by the school resource officers, the police officers that
Well,
were
I
on
wouldn't count
campus.
that. I would not count that.
See, they counted that. There was a suicide in Arizona of a 11-year-old, and I think that in and of itself is a big story that happened on a campus. Basically, what happened when I looked at the numbers, my own definition, there was only 3 school shootings during the first part of this year, and
3 too many, Dan.
it's 3 too many. But at the same time, we've got to look at it reasonably.
Again,
I mean,
Kent State for the better part of 25 odd years, to my knowledge, I'm sure there was probably at least one more, but that event stood alone. I mean, it stood alone for decades.
Well, yeah, but Kent State had a lot of other dynamics. It was the National Guard. It was the government that had actually killed American college students on American soil.
Good point. So remove that one and go and we had decades of non-gunfired violence.
Well, we had, but it wasn't making news. Here's my contention: what makes a school shooting more important than the other 16,900 American citizens who have been murdered? What makes the school shooting more important than all those other citizens? And especially when you look at it and you say the school shootings, the chance of those happening are so remote. But that's what we fixate on. I think we should fixate on, why does Western Europe, have such a low incident of homicides? I mean, dramatically lower than us. But we lose 17,000 of our citizens a year.
A lot of people point to Australia. A lot of people speak to Australia having taken the measures. I can't remember if it was like the late 90s or early 2000s.
Yeah, they had a mass shooting down there,
yeah.
And they passed a resolution, and they removed a lot of guns.
So your whole point, though, is keep it in context, keep a healthy perspective on it. Let's not get so fixated on the school shootings. This is a
wider issue,
right?
We have 17,000 now. That starts to become a bigger number, and then 35,000 or 34,000 suicides. So when you put those two together, we're looking at 50,000 Americans every single year. Now there's 330 million of us, so still it's a small number, but 50,000 Americans every single year will die at the hand of because of a gun involved. A gun is the tool that was involved. So we can either fixate strictly on schools, where we say, well, let's make them safer, and let's make schools safer. Well, why not make a lot of different things safer and save those 17,000 lives? And they'll include the schools.
So you're just basically saying cast a bigger net.
I'm saying cast a bigger net, and the bigger net is going to be the one. I think the baby step to start with is, don't let people under the age of 21 possess or buy a firearm, or possess a firearm without an adult being present with them. That's what I think is the very first baby step. Do that one first. Let's see how it rolls. As far as assault weapons goes, we need to have firm definitions with that. And I can agree with what a lot of folks say. You don't need to have an AR-15 to go hunting. I mean, that's really unfair to the deer and the elk. That kind of takes the sportsman part out of it. But there are so many of those guns in circulation already that if we bite off too much, nothing will happen. That's our government. So
I find it interesting. I found it interesting to see one of the fallout reports about law enforcement selling AR-15s along with other weapons that have been seized. Which helps fund their departments. Interesting. Many interesting components, and I'm sure there are many other voices that would love to interject on conversations such as this one. Really, I think my aim here is to be transparent and to be open-minded, to not necessarily, stick to one side or the other, but try and bring some common sense into everything, kind of a middle ground, if you will, but something that yields results. And if baby steps is what it's going to take to get results in this particular case, I'm all for the baby steps. Dan, this is the first time we've done this. How are you feeling about it?
I hope we do it again.
You enjoyed it.
I hope the viewers chime in a little bit more and really let us know in this topic of guns, especially, how they feel. Am I off in left field? Am I right? you know, this we need the banter. We need the good solid banter, because it's what will get positive changes done. You know, my idea may be bad. There may be a viewer out there who says I have a better idea, and it really is a better idea. But that's how you keep the conversation rolling. We always have good conversations. We never scream at each other.
No, we don't. We oftentimes come up with stories that we wish would be done, right?
Yes.
And someone says, "As a conversation regarding alcohol, so we don't get killed by DUIs."
Well, that's going to solve itself. Here's my prediction, Joseph. That's going to solve itself 5 years from now, when we have when we start really rolling out the driverless vehicles. Yeah, the issues with DWIs are going to start really going away. And I don't know what insurance companies are going to do when all of a sudden, almost all accidents are human error. Well, what's the insurance company going to do when you take that component out of it? When Mark can get as drunk as he'd like to get, jump into his vehicle, which doesn't have a steering wheel or a gas pedal, and just tell it, drive me home. He's not driving DWI anymore. DUI. 5 years, we're going to see driverless vehicles out here, and that problem will be fixed with technology.
You always have such colorful examples, my friend. It's a change. Speaking of technology, it'll be interesting to see, for example, where states like this one draw their funding from when there's no longer a fuel tax. If there are, number one, alternative methods for powering vehicles, but also perhaps even fewer vehicles if more rideshare becomes increasingly popular in telecommuting.
You look at how expensive vehicles are. New vehicles are almost half the price sometimes of a home. I always thought if you could get away with it, wouldn't it just be easier not to even have a driver's license, but just to use your Uber app and let someone else take you? And then once driverless cars come around, you won't need a vehicle. There will be a fleet of driverless cars that someone else maintains. All you do is call it up on your phone and say, be here in front of my house at this time. You jump in, take me over here. Your credit card's charged, and you're done. And how much cheaper would that be than going out and buying a vehicle yourself? I don't know. In Albuquerque and more wide open. Seattle maybe is a little bit that way, although traffic in Seattle is a nightmare. But I always thought, you go back to New York and Chicago and places like that. I think these driverless vehicles, they'll run the taxi cabs out of business for the most part, which is kind of sad. But people will be able to get around a lot easier. And if you're handicapped, imagine the freedom you will have with a driverless vehicle. You're blind, or you don't have legs, or you have MS or something like that, and you cannot drive. You don't need to. All you need to be able to do is communicate with your smartphone to tell the vehicle that picks you up where you want to go. It's a good time to be alive, where we are going to see a lot of good changes. Guns need to also be brought up into the 21st century, and we need to have the changes with that too.
Speaking of technology, I'd like to recommend a book if you haven't already read it, because it gets into issues like driverless cars and the future of work and the type of jobs that will be there, and the type of jobs that won't be there. It's called The Inevitable. It's by Kevin Kelly, and I highly recommend it.
Okay.
Maybe down the road we could talk more about tech issues if you're into, speculating and seeing where.
I love the tech issues. It's like the body cameras. The number one reason officers in Albuquerque are disciplined is because they fail to turn on their body cameras. That doesn't even have to exist. We have the technology here today that when the dispatch gets put out, that the body camera would automatically come on. It's just APD didn't buy that technology, and so instead we write up officers for not flipping their cameras on when they're supposed to. Well, take the officer out of the equation. Dispatch, when you send the officer on the call, the computer automatically tells the camera on the officer's chest, turn on.
Damn.
Or when the officer turns on his lights and sirens, the camera comes on.
Let me reach over here again. Reporter hat's going back on. Okay, so let me just ask a question. When you say that they didn't purchase that technology, is it possible that the technology would have meant having to go with a different vendor?
Well, yes, quite possibly, and we're
And
still
were there
waiting for.
deals struck, and were there relationships that perhaps weren't always the best? I don't know. You have some history here. I've heard you kind of
Yes,
pontificate a bit in the
yes,
past.
and that is the problem with Taser. Taser back a few years ago seemed to be hiring a lot of police chiefs immediately after those police chiefs were signing multi-million-dollar contracts with Taser. And that happened here in Albuquerque. It's still under investigation by the Attorney General's office. 4 years later, that is not good government. The Attorney General should get off his butt and make a decision on this thing. But yeah, you're having, I think, police chiefs from a whole bunch of different jurisdictions. All of a sudden we're signing off on multi-million-dollar camera deals with Taser and then retiring within 90 days or 6 months and going to work for Taser International to sell their product. That's not good government, and that
Were they
should
also
not have been.
receiving? Were they also receiving a pension?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And so yeah,
Of course they were.
and the thing is, Taser puts out a good product.
Yeah.
They don't have to do. They didn't have to do what they were doing. I think it harmed their brand, because everybody, to me, in law enforcement, everybody looks at Taser now and says, who did they buy off? And that's too bad. But they did this to themselves, and they have a hill to climb. And it's funny because everybody knows Taser for the Taser gun, the stun gun. But because of all the lawsuits and deaths that have become up, that it may not have been caused by the Taser device, but the Taser device was in use when the person died. I saw Taser, I think, do a very smart move a year or two ago, and they seem to really kind of be backing off of the stun gun, and they're really dumping their everything into their body cameras, and then they changed the name of the body camera to Axiom. So the Taser's not even being used with that. It's the Axiom. They're a subsidiary now of Taser. It's a really good product, and hopefully they'll put it out to police departments in a fairer way of competition, and not feeling that they have to get the inside track all the time, because it just makes people think that it's corruption, and sometimes it wasn't. But they've made that bed with a number of things they've done over the last few years. But there is that technology. Why wasn't it used? Why isn't it used today? It's a great question. And they say, well, it might cost some more. Really? Really? You really think that it's that expensive to add that bit of technology? I don't think so. I think that that's a computer guy who's making a code and that's all it is, to turn it on. To turn on the officer's camera when he gets a dispatch and not allow the officer to have control over it. But it's a selling point, and so that you can sell it, and you can maybe drive up the price unless your competition starts bringing it down. The big money with body cameras isn't the camera itself. The big money is the storage, cloud storage.
Yeah.
That's the big money, and that's where, when you look at the contracts that police departments get into, no matter what the company is, they try to really hook them into storage through the company. I really recommend that each jurisdiction should have their own cloud storage. You buy the cameras and you handle the storage, because if you ever decide to change the camera vendor and the storage, that's evidence. How are you going to get it back? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And how do you protect it from being hacked? And there's just so many things. It's just like letting someone else, the Hassenkoff case. We have all this evidence, and Mark knows the Hassenkoff case. Everyone should go out and buy September Sacrifice. It is an excellent read.
Please go on now.
There you go. And it is an excellent read. But could you imagine if the Albuquerque Police Department said, no, we don't have an evidence room. We use AAA self-storage. Go talk to Jimbo over there at AAA self-storage. He's not a city employee, but he runs it, and he should be able to find where the evidence in this murder case is at. That's kind of the same way that we're doing with cloud storage for police videos. It goes to the cloud in Taser or Axiom's case through evidence.com. The department really doesn't own that. Evidence.com owns that once it's there. That's evidence. That really bothers me, and I'm surprised that a defense attorney has not brought that up and made it an issue, that as soon as a private vendor got a hold of the evidence of a lapel camera, the chain of custody was broken and it should be thrown out.
Is
So
evidence
any defense
is,
out there,
is evidence.com owned by Taser, or is it strictly independent from Taser?
They're like a subsidiary of Taser.
Oh,
if
wow.
If you go to Taser's website, they'll link it, immediately links right over into evidence.com, Axon, and it's good stuff. Don't get me wrong.
But it's all Taser.
But it's all Taser.
Wow. You remind me of, I don't know if you know who Dave Ramsey is, but he's a kind of a financial guru. And he talks about, when you go to a car dealership, the buying the car is one thing, but where the real money is, in addition to the car, beyond the car, it's in the warranty, it's in the service center, those two areas. So the car is the thing that you're all focused on, and in the case of Taser, it might be the stun gun or it might be the camera, but it's the cloud storage. Really, it sounds as the way as you have explained it to me, and thank you, is really the golden.
That's the money. That is the money, because they'll sell, they sell licensing to get access to it. Taser will go into departments and say, look, we're going to give you the cameras for free. Free, take the cameras.
Yeah.
But we want you to sign a 5-year contract with evidence.com. And, and they know how to make the money. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're a company, they're trying to make money.
But this is a matter, though, you're saying nothing wrong with that. But again, to reiterate, you're talking about evidence.
It's evidence. It's a court thing. And I'm just surprised no defense attorneys walked up and said, hey, Albuquerque, you can't show the judge and jury this footage because it was out of your hands.
Chain of custody.
Chain of custody. And I just, and I might be completely wet with this, but I do think that is an issue that needs to be popped up and answered. And, maybe the courts will say, no, this is the 21st century. Third-party vendors can have this. We're okay with it. Okay, fine. That hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened in the state of Washington where I work. I would love to have the opportunity to use a cloud service for all the video production that I do, but I can't, because of the rules that exist within the state. We have to watch training videos for us as employees about what we're allowed and what we're not, what we can and can't do. And basically everything has to stay in-house. We can't trust these third parties with what we produce.
But in police, with something that could put someone away for the rest of their lives or give them the death penalty in some states,
it's a fascinating topic, Dan, and we may very well have to revisit this one once there is a bit of news perhaps made on it. Maybe there's something already happening, or could be down the road, where there is an attorney and maybe there's a class action or something, or there's a court case going on the criminal side even. That would be something on this very issue of cloud storage as it relates to evidence with a third-party chain of custody. That would be fascinating. Fascinating. Well, I tell you what.
And I don't know this for a fact, but do you know who Taser or Axon and who all these companies basically buy their storage from?
Well, I was going to say, I was wondering, is it Amazon?
It's Amazon.
Okay, so let me tell you, Amazon storage is incredibly cheap. And that's what makes Amazon the backbone of so much that we consume when we stream, when we download Netflix, I believe is Amazon, and many others. AWS services, Amazon Web Services. It's just pennies on the dollar, and Amazon has these server farms throughout the world, right? I don't think it's just the U.S. And this is where so much of when you think you are dealing with all these variety of companies in your everyday life, I imagine a lot of what perhaps is getting stored, if you have home security cameras, if you have business security cameras, a lot of that footage is probably with your company being used. They're using that company, that provider is using Amazon to store your video.
Here's my question for you, and we can, I know we've gone over, so we can maybe talk about this next time.
This is so par for the course.
Microsoft is in a big fight with the federal government because they have their specific servers over in Ireland. And I think it's Homeland Security and the NSA, they want some information that Microsoft has, or Google, I forget, got Microsoft or Google, and they're saying no. And we don't have to give it to you because we hold it outside of the nation. We hold it in servers over in Ireland. So it's from computers in the United States through the internet over to Ireland. So the question becomes, where is Amazon servers for, where is it holding? And if a smart attorney ever comes up and says, hey, my client I've got this code, and I know that my client's lapel videos that show him doing this armed robbery or doing whatever, that's being held in Amazon servers in Mexico. Now, do we have even a bigger issue with chain of custody, where that defendant could come in and say, you can't show them this stuff. It's not even been held. That chain of custody was broken the minute they sent it to Amazon because it went down to Mexico to some big building down in Mexico City. Good questions that it's
These
the
are
world
great
that
questions.
we live in.
And let me the world that we will live in. Let me throw it a step further for a bit in the future, if it's not already here. Is it possible that video and other things, digital, could be stored on a server in space?
There you go. And once it's outside the nation for police work, what does that mean? Once it's outside of the nation for security, that's a case going through the courts right now. And
Well,
Microsoft
I think
or
space would
Google
get.
are saying,
I think space would get you through any sort of internation police attempts, such as Interpol, which is an organization where states, countries nations work together. The Hasenkopf case involved Interpol. So I'm just, these are incredibly fascinating questions, and I guess I echo your interest in what the defense side, I would think in particular, might do in the future on this issue in terms of contesting the chain of evidence.
all it takes is one court case.
And then that thing goes up the chain
court case.
to the Supreme Court ultimately, and that becomes the case that gets cited going forward.
And then all of a sudden, all these agencies say, oh, crap, we've got to buy our own storage and maybe keep it right in Albuquerque so that we don't lose chain of custody. But all of a sudden, maybe we've lost thousands of cases in the meantime.
Yeah.
I hope I don't want to see that happen.
Yeah.
We can head this off at the pass, but apparently that horse has already left the barn, and interesting stuff. We'll just have to see where it goes.
We've always got something to talk about in the future. We'll have to do another one of these. Dan Klein is our guest tonight. Dan, thank you very much for your time. I want to remind people that in the description below this video, if you want to read more about Dan's company, USA Locators LLC, there's a short link in the description below. You can go check it out. Read the testimonial, see what people have to say about it. Check out the Better Business Bureau rating. It's way up there. Also,
and if you get a letter from us,
that's good news.
Give us a call. It's good news.
And also, you write for ABQ Report, and there's a link to that website as well. Your most recent article was how many days ago, just so people know how far to go back to look?
Just like 2 days ago. It's a two-part series.
Two-part series. Have you written both parts? Are they both published?
Yes, both parts are up there.
Okay, and again, that was basically about your contention that we're a nation of fear, far more fearful than we have to be.
Than we should be.
We
live in a real good time right now.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as what you think.
Right on, Dan. Well, also, if people at home like this kind of content, please feel free to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and it would be great to have you along and join us for these live chats in the future. It's always a pleasure to have you along. I want to build this channel up. We did something last week with a live interview, doing it again this weekend. I work all week long, and I have an incredibly long commute, but I'm really committed right now to see how this might be received in terms of doing live interviews, live chat opportunities, see if we can grow this channel into a fun place to visit, learn, and share going forward. So please do subscribe, please do share, and I hope to see you again. Dan, thanks so much for being on tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye, Mark.
All right, take care, my friend. And with that, thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a great week. So long, everybody.